Blood was soaking through the shoulder of Vance's cheap suit. He didn't make a single sound. His heavy boots slipped on the polished concrete floor as he pushed up against a solid steel security door. That door weighed over 2 tons. Its hydraulic system had been hacked to crush anything caught underneath it. Clara was trapped on the floor, right beneath that heavy metal edge. She was the billionaire CEO of a massive biomedical empire. She was also the woman who, just 3 days ago, had looked Vance in the eye and called him a worthless waste of oxygen. Now, she could only watch, in absolute horror. This man, she despised, was tearing his own muscles apart, just to buy her a few extra seconds of life, right here, at the edge of life and death. If you agree that money cannot buy real loyalty, leave the words "I choose to value silent sacrifices" to step into this story with us. To understand how they got to this underground bunker, we have to go back 3 weeks. Clara lived in a world where everything had a price tag. Her corner office sat on the top floor of a glass skyscraper. She evaluated people based on the brand of their shoes and the size of their bank accounts. Her fiancé, Julian, was the chief financial officer of her company. Julian was charming, wore perfectly tailored Italian suits, and always knew exactly what to say to make Clara feel powerful. Then, there was Vance. The board of directors had forced Clara to hire a personal bodyguard after an anonymous threat was sent to the company. Vance showed up on his first day, wearing a faded gray suit that looked like it came from a thrift store. He had a long, jagged scar running down the left side of his neck. He rarely spoke. His eyes were always scanning the room, checking the corners, and mapping out the exits. It was a habit you don't pick up in a corporate training seminar. Clara hated him immediately. She felt like his gritty presence was ruining her perfect, aesthetic life. Julian made it much worse. He would constantly make small, cutting jokes about Vance's clothes and his absolute silence. Clara decided she was going to make Vance quit. She started with deliberate, petty inconveniences. One evening, she made him stand outside a fancy restaurant in the freezing rain for 3 straight hours. She claimed the valet area needed securing. She sat inside by the warm fireplace, drinking expensive wine with Julian, watching Vance through the heavy glass window. Vance just stood there by the car, letting the cold rain soak right through to his bones. He did not complain once. Clara thought he was just a pathetic man who had zero self-respect. What she did not know was what Vance was actually dealing with when he went home. Vance didn't have a home. Not really. He spent his nights sleeping in a stiff plastic chair on the 4th floor of a pediatric hospital. His 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was fighting a very rare bone marrow condition. She was hooked up to machines that beeped constantly through the night. Vance had taken this bodyguard job because the hazard pay was massive. It was the absolute only way he could keep the hospital from stopping Lily's expensive treatments. He would gladly take 1,000 insults from a spoiled CEO if it meant his little girl got to open her eyes the next morning. By the 2nd week, Vance's military instincts started picking up on something very wrong at the company. He noticed Julian taking encrypted phone calls in the underground parking garage. He saw Julian accessing the core server room late at night, long after the IT team had gone home. Vance even spotted Julian meeting with a known corporate fixer at a diner outside the city. Vance tried to warn Clara. He approached her desk one morning and told her that Julian's behavior was a massive security risk. Clara laughed right in his face. She told him he was just a paranoid, uneducated driver, trying to act important. She threatened to fire him on the spot if he ever disrespected a high-level executive again. Vance just nodded, stepped back, and went back to standing quietly by the door. 2 days later, everything shifted. Clara was getting into the back seat of her car when she noticed a crumpled piece of paper on the floor mat. It must have fallen out of Vance's jacket pocket during a sharp turn. It was a final notice from the billing department of the city's largest pediatric hospital. The total amount due was absolutely staggering. At the very bottom, it listed the patient's name as Lily. Age 6. Something uncomfortable shifted deep in Clara's chest. That evening, instead of going straight to her penthouse, she told her regular driver to drop her off at that hospital. She told herself it was just curiosity. She walked down the brightly lit hallways until she found room 412. She stopped at the doorway. Inside, she saw Vance, the man who never smiled, the man she had treated like absolute dirt, was sitting on the floor. He was wearing a silly paper crown, reading a fairy tale in a soft, animated voice. The little girl in the hospital bed was bald and pale, but she was laughing so hard. She was out of breath. Vance looked at her with so much pure love that it physically hurt Clara to watch. Clara realized she had been judging a man based on his cheap suit, completely blind to the incredible weight of the world he was carrying on his shoulders. She backed away slowly, before he could turn around and see her. She walked straight down to the billing department on the first floor. Using a private, untraceable trust account, she paid off the entire medical balance. She asked them to keep the donor anonymous. When you realize that behind a rough exterior is a truly great father. If your heart feels that pull, write down, "I choose to value silent sacrifices." The next morning, Clara walked into the office feeling completely different. She looked at Vance standing quietly by the elevator, and for the first time, she saw a human being instead of a tool. But Julian had also noticed a shift in her behavior. Julian was no fool, and he knew his window to steal the company's core algorithm was rapidly closing. He had to act immediately. That afternoon, Julian asked Clara to accompany him down to the underground data center for a routine server check. He explicitly ordered Vance to take the company car into a mechanic on the other side of the city. Clara agreed, thinking absolutely nothing of it. The moment the heavy steel doors of the data center locked securely behind them, Julian's charming and polished smile completely vanished. 3 heavily armed men stepped out from behind the glowing server racks. They were elite mercenaries, hired to make this look like a random corporate heist gone wrong. Julian slammed a secure tablet onto a metal table. He demanded Clara transfer the master encryption keys to an untraceable offshore account, or she would never leave this concrete bunker alive. Clara's multi-million-dollar security system was entirely useless now. Julian had methodically disabled it from the inside over the past few weeks. She was a billionaire. Yet standing there, she was completely powerless. Meanwhile, Vance was driving across town when his instincts kicked into high gear. He noticed something was deeply wrong. The traffic lights on the specific route Julian gave him were manually desynchronized. It was a classic, textbook delay tactic used in extraction missions. Vance spun the heavy car around in the middle of an intersection, breaking every speed limit to get back to the corporate tower. When he found the main lobby locked down and the private elevators disabled, he didn't panic or waste time screaming for help. On his very first day on the job, Vance had meticulously memorized the building's original architectural blueprints. He bypassed the locked digital doors by prying open and crawling through a forgotten industrial ventilation shaft down in the bunker. Clara firmly refused to sign the transfer. Julian lost his patience entirely and ordered his men to physically handle her. Suddenly, every single light in the massive data center went pitch black. Vance had found and cut the main breaker. In the total darkness, the elite mercenaries were blind, confused, and highly disoriented. But Vance was absolutely in his element. He didn't use a gun, because gunfire would attract the wrong kind of attention. Instead, he used the heavy server racks, the loose network cables, and the tight, claustrophobic corners to silently take down the guards, one by one. Julian panicked, hearing the muffled thuds in the dark. He grabbed Clara by the arm and dragged her roughly toward the emergency exit, hitting the manual override button to drop the massive hydraulic security door. He shoved Clara hard, knocking her straight to the cold floor, right in the direct path of the falling steel. That is the exact moment. Vance burst out of the shadows. He didn't hesitate for a single second. He threw his own body under the descending door, catching the crushing, unforgiving weight on his own shoulders. Blood immediately soaked through his cheap gray jacket, but his heavy boots held firm against the concrete. Julian looked at Vance in absolute, paralyzing shock. He couldn't understand why a low-paid driver would willingly die for a boss who had constantly humiliated him. The most despised person in the room was now the only unshakable shield she had left. Don't forget the words that connect us right now. I choose to value silent sacrifices. With an agonizing, guttural roar, Vance shoved the heavy door upward, just enough for Clara to frantically roll to safety. The door slammed down viciously behind her, permanently separating them from Julian. The heavily armed police arrived moments later, alerted by the silent perimeter alarm Vance had intentionally triggered on his way down. Julian was arrested on the spot, screaming about his lawyers. Clara's massive empire was safely preserved, but her entire perspective on human life had permanently shattered. 2 days later, Clara visited Vance in his private hospital room. His shoulder was heavily bandaged and immobilized, but he was sitting up in bed, quiet and observant as always. Clara carefully placed a thick envelope on his bed. It contained a legally binding contract for 5% of her entire company. Enough money to make him wildly rich for 10 lifetimes. Vance looked down at the envelope, and then he gently slid it back toward her. He told her he didn't need her corporate shares. He just wanted his regular, agreed-upon salary, and maybe a single day off to take Lily to the park. Clara fought back tears as she asked him why he risked his life for someone who treated him so poorly. Vance looked her dead in the eye, his expression completely softening, and said, "Because I saw the billing receipt from the pediatric ward. You saved my world when you didn't have to, so I made sure to save yours." A month later, on a bright and sunny Sunday afternoon, Clara wasn't sitting in her cold glass office. She was wearing plain denim jeans and a simple cotton sweater, sitting quietly on a wooden park bench. Next to her sat Vance and a little girl named Lily, who was happily eating a wildly melting chocolate ice cream cone. 3 people from entirely different, clashing worlds, bound together forever by an unspoken respect and deep gratitude. Real power is not about how many people you stand above in a boardroom. It is about who will actually stay to catch you when you finally fall, for the very last time. If you truly believe in the power of humanity, declare it loudly by saying, "I choose to value silent sacrifices." And if you love authentic stories about true loyalty, redemption, and karma, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We will see you in the next incredible story.